You stepped outside this morning the way you always do. Coffee in hand, maybe a little slower than you meant to move, half watching the feeder, half watching nothing at all. The chickadee landed on the platform and was gone before you finished your first sip. The cardinal sat in the serviceberry long enough for you to notice the red, and then he left too. And you thought, if anything, that this was just a quiet morning, just birds doing bird things. What you didn't know, what almost nobody knows, is that not one of those birds was doing anything casually. The chickadee clocked which window you came from. The cardinal registered that you moved slowly, that you didn't reach toward the feeder, that you looked without leaning, and both of them filed that information away with the kind of precision that has nothing to do with luck or instinct and everything to do with a cognitive system that has been studying you, specifically you, for weeks or months without you realizing you were ever the subject. Birds are not background. They are not decoration on your morning. They are observers, and they are very, very good at it. What they have been watching, your schedule, your movements, your habits, your patterns, your predictability, shapes every decision they make about whether your yard is worth their time, their safety, and eventually their trust. The 10 things we are going to walk through today are not dramatic behaviors. You've done all of them. You're doing some of them right now. And the birds in your yard have noticed every single one. If this is already making you look at the birds outside differently, hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps. And drop a comment telling me which birds visit your yard most often. I love knowing who I'm talking to. To understand why birds study people the way they do, you need to understand what a yard actually is from a bird's point of view. It is not a place. It is a risk calculation that never stops running. Every time a bird enters your yard, every single visit from the first one in October to the 1,000th one in March, it is answering the same question: is the cost of being here lower than the benefit of what I can get? Food, water, shelter, and safety are always on one side of that scale. Predator exposure, unpredictability, and threat signals are always on the other. The calculation updates constantly, and the variable that shifts it most, more than feeder quality, more than seed type, more than landscaping, is you, the human attached to the space. Because to a bird, you are either a predictable feature of a safe territory or an unpredictable threat that could flush them at any moment. Which one you are is not decided by a single morning. It is built over time, one observation at a time, one quiet data point laid on top of another until a picture forms. Research on human-wildlife habituation, particularly work with corvids and passerine songbirds in residential areas, has shown that birds in yards with a consistent low-threat human presence develop measurably lower baseline stress responses than birds in yards where humans behave unpredictably. The consistent human is not just tolerated, they are factored in as part of the environment, which means the way you move, the time you appear, the things you do without thinking, all of it is going into a model that determines whether the northern cardinal perched in your shrubs right now decides to stay in your yard or move on to somewhere quieter. Most people, when they think about attracting birds, focus outward: better seed, a new feeder style, a water feature, a bird-friendly shrub. All of that matters. But the behaviors that have the most weight in a bird's ongoing risk assessment are the ones you never planned for, the daily human habits you repeat so consistently that you stopped noticing them years ago. The first one happens every single morning, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. Your arrival time. When you first appear outside, or at the window, or at the feeder, whether that's 6:47 a.m., because that's when you take the dog out, or 8:15 because that's when you have your first coffee on the porch, birds track it. Black-capped chickadees and house finches, species that have been studied extensively for feeder site fidelity, have demonstrated the ability to anticipate human feeding schedules and begin adjusting their arrival times to front-run them. The research on this, conducted through feeder monitoring studies in suburban habitats across the northeastern United States, shows that birds don't just respond to a feeder being filled. They respond to the pattern of when it is filled. When that pattern is consistent, they begin arriving before the event. When it is inconsistent, they treat the feeder as a lower reliability resource and visit less frequently, spending more time in areas where the timing is predictable. You may have noticed this without identifying what you were seeing. The feeder gets busier right after you fill it, but on days you skip or run late, activity feels thinner. That's not coincidence. The birds know your rhythm, and your rhythm is one of the quietest ways you have ever communicated something to another living creature. The second behavior birds have been clocking is how you move when you're near them. Not dramatically, not anything you would describe as threatening. The specific thing they're watching is your body orientation. Whether you move toward the feeder directly, whether you stop and face it, whether you walk parallel to it without breaking stride. American crows and blue jays, both highly cognitively flexible species, have been shown in experimental settings to distinguish between a human walking toward them and a human walking in the same direction without orienting to them. The crow that sits in your oak tree when you walk to the car is not ignoring you. It's reading your angle of approach and comparing it to the data it already has on what your approach angles tend to mean. For the smaller feeder birds, dark-eyed juncos, white-throated sparrows, song sparrows, the key variable is whether you slow down near the feeder or pass it at a normal pace. Slowing signals attention. Attention signals possible disruption. Not because you are dangerous, but because disruption is the variable they can't control, and birds avoid what they can't predict. The third thing you do that birds have been cataloging is something you probably consider completely unrelated to them: your noise level. Not loud noises, not sudden ones. Those are obvious disruptors, and we'll get to those. But your baseline daily sound, the volume of your back door, whether you talk on the phone outside, whether you play music on the porch, whether your household is generally quiet in the mornings or generally active. Birds calibrate to ambient sound the same way they calibrate to ambient movement. A yard that is consistently at a certain noise level becomes predictable, and predictable means safe. The problem arises not from volume, but from variation. A yard that is quiet 4 mornings and then has a loud gathering on the fifth registers as unreliable to the birds that had been settling into its rhythms. White-throated sparrows and song sparrows, both species heavily dependent on acoustic cues for predator detection, have been documented in field studies to reduce foraging time in areas where ambient noise levels fluctuate unpredictably, even when the noise has no direct threat attached to it. Unpredictable sound takes up processing bandwidth that birds need for actual threat assessment. A yard that forces constant acoustic recalibration is a yard that costs more to use than it's worth. This doesn't mean your yard needs to be a library. It means consistency is the signal. If you always have the radio on low at the same volume from the same direction, the birds will register that as background and stop responding to it within days. The thing they are studying is not your sound level. It is whether your sound level is something they can count on. The fourth behavior is one almost nobody considers, and it is responsible for more cold shoulder treatment from yard birds than most people would guess. Your gaze, where you look when you're outside. Sustained, direct eye contact is a threat signal in nearly every prey species on the planet, and birds are no exception. A northern mockingbird or an American robin foraging in your lawn reads a direct, unbroken stare from 12 feet the same way it reads a hawk overhead, as the orientation behavior of something that is about to make a move. The bird doesn't know you're just admiring it. It knows that predators fix their gaze before they strike, and you are fixing your gaze. The backyard birders who have the deepest relationships with the birds in their yards, the ones cardinals will approach within a few feet, the ones chickadees will land near without hesitation, almost universally share a habit they developed without being taught it. They look sideways. They observe with peripheral vision. They let their eyes drift past the bird rather than settle on it. This is not mysticism, it's behavioral biology. A human who looks without locking gaze reads as non-threatening to a bird the same way a relaxed posture reads as non-threatening. You can practice this at your window today. Watch the bird without watching the bird. The difference in how close they'll come will show up within a week. The fifth thing birds have been tracking is your predictability around the feeder itself, specifically when you approach it and what the approach looks like. Birds that regularly use a feeder develop what researchers call a site map, a spatial memory of the feeder's location, its approach corridors, the cover nearby, and the human patterns associated with it. When you fill the feeder at irregular intervals, approach it from different directions on different days, or make sudden changes to the area around it, you introduce gaps in the site map that trigger reassessment. A northern cardinal, among the most cartography-dependent of common backyard species, may stop visiting a feeder for 3 to 5 days after a change in approach pattern alone, even if the feeder itself, the seed, and the surrounding environment are all identical to what they were before. The fix here is almost embarrassingly simple. Pick a route to the feeder and use it every time. Same direction, same pace, same general time of day. Within 2 to 3 weeks, that route becomes invisible to the birds the way furniture becomes invisible to you. It's there, it's registered, it requires no further evaluation. The sixth behavior is about what you do after something startling happens in the yard. A car alarm goes off on your street, a dog barks, a child shouts. These sounds cause a flush. Birds scatter, the yard empties in under a second. What you do in the 60 seconds after that flush is something the birds watch from wherever they've landed in the surrounding trees. Most people go back inside. Some glance at the feeder and walk away. A smaller number stay still, stay calm, and remain in the yard at a relaxed pace. The birds are watching all of this. Research on post-disturbance recovery in backyard bird populations shows that yards where a calm human presence resumes quickly after a disruption event see birds return to the feeder significantly faster than yards that empty of human presence after the disturbance. The calm human returning to normal behavior functions as a safety signal. Their presence says, the event is over, the environment has been assessed, and it is okay to come back. You are doing this already, in one form or another, every time something startles the birds in your yard. The question is only whether the signal you're sending afterward is the one that brings them back faster or keeps them out longer. The seventh thing is your relationship with the water. Not just whether you have it, whether you maintain it on a schedule the birds can anticipate. A bird bath that is reliably clean and full at the same time every morning becomes part of the yard's daily resource map the same way the feeder does. American robins and gray catbirds, both species highly water-dependent and among the sharpest assessors of resource reliability in residential settings, will commit to a yard with a dependable water source over a yard with better food but unpredictable water access. The pattern of the maintenance matters as much as the maintenance itself. A bird bath freshened every day at 7 in the morning tells a bird something different than one freshened whenever someone remembers. One is a resource, the other is a gamble. If you're finding this helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I upload new videos every week and I'd hate for you to miss one. Your support is what makes this channel possible, and it genuinely means the world to me. The eighth behavior has nothing to do with what you do in the yard. It has to do with what you do inside it, visible through glass. Birds are watching your windows, not in an unsettling way, in the same way they watch any part of the environment that moves and changes and sometimes contains a large, warm-blooded shape. A person who moves through a lit room at the same time each evening, visible from the yard, becomes part of the environmental data. The mockingbird that roosts in your holly bush every night has a mental record of your window activity that you have never once thought to provide. When that pattern changes, when the light that's always on at 9 is suddenly dark, or when a room that was quiet suddenly has movement and noise at an unusual hour, birds adjust their assessment of that space. It is one of the quietest ways a human being has ever communicated something without knowing they were communicating anything at all. The ninth behavior is one that takes people by surprise when they hear it, because it feels too small to matter. Whether you acknowledge the birds when you see them, not dramatically, not by calling out to them or trying to interact. Something quieter than that. A glance that lingers a beat longer than a passing look, a pause in your step when a cardinal lands nearby, the small stillness of a person who has noticed something and chosen to stay with it rather than move on. Birds, particularly corvids like American crows and blue jays, but also the more cognitively flexible songbirds like northern mockingbirds, distinguish between humans who register them and humans who don't. The ones who register them are more predictable because their behavior changes slightly and consistently in response to the bird's presence. Predictable means lower risk. Lower risk means the bird stays. The 10th thing is the one that takes longest to build and matters most in the end. It is simply that you came back, day after day, season after season, in the cold and in the heat, when the feeder was slow and when it was busy. You were there. You filled the water, you refilled the seed, you stood at the window on mornings when nothing came and kept the routine anyway. Birds that return to a yard year after year, the same white-throated sparrow back from its breeding grounds in October, the same female cardinal at the same branch every dawn, are not returning because the seed is exceptional. They are returning because the yard held, because the human attached to it proved over a long enough stretch of time to be exactly what they appeared to be: consistent, safe, worth coming back to. That is not a small thing to earn from a wild animal. It takes months, sometimes years, and it happens so gradually that most people don't notice the moment it shifts. The morning the birds stop flushing when you walk out, the afternoon a chickadee stays on the feeder while you fill it, the day you realize the yard is never quite empty anymore. You didn't set out to become part of their world, you just kept showing up, and somewhere in all those quiet mornings, they decided you were worth trusting. That's the whole secret. You were always being watched. You just didn't know what you were showing them. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. It means everything. If this video changed how you see the birds in your yard even a little, please share it with someone who loves nature. Check out the videos on your screen now. I think you'll love them. And subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one.